Okay, let's try and unpack this unusual space we've entered. It feels less like a typical room and more like a descent, maybe. A deep, quiet stillness where the air itself seems to be holding its breath.
That's a really good way to put it.
We seem to be moving beyond the noise, the chatter of the conscious mind and into, well, the archive of the self.
That's exactly right. We are stepping into the deep archive, where the body keeps its truest records. The mind might lose a name, maybe a date, it might rationalize a past choice.
Sure, it does that all the time.
But the body, it never forgets the shape of its earliest desires or the specific geometry of its deepest wounds. This is definitely a journey beneath the surface, following a single, really profound image.
And the image that calls us down it's stark.
Yeah.
It really is. It's the hand lying open, almost like it's offered up for a review.
Yeah.
Palms up, not clenched in fear or anything, but just presented. And all the attention, it just focuses entirely on the stain.
A stain that is thick and quiet. As you say, it doesn't pulse, it doesn't drip, it just clings, like something ancient. It's not simply, residue from a nightmare. It feels more like a memory you never actually chose to keep.
Right.
Yet it is undeniably yours, settled right there on the skin.
So our mission today for this deep dive is really to witness this truth the body has held hostage, maybe, and delivered back to us in the raw, symbolic language of the night. We are here to look at the stain, not really seeking evidence of a crime committed in the daylight world, but seeking the truth of a deep psychological confession, something made in the dark.
We are here to read the alphabet of the repressed. And for you, our listener, we really invite you to recognize this language, because this deep dive is all about finding the meaning in those emotional ciphers that can haunt our sleep.
The paradox of this stain is, I think, what makes it so gripping, as we've kind of established. It's not wet. It doesn't scream a warning. It is the warning somehow. This stillness, this quiet acceptance of its presence feels, well, it feels worse than any loud accusation could be. It immediately forces that terrifying question. Who did I have to become to make this stain feel so real, so absolute?
It doesn't feel like a spontaneous wound, does it?
Uh-huh.
It feels more like dried ink from a crucial, maybe painful letter you wrote decades ago but never sent.
Oh, interesting.
Or it's the rust that clings to your fingers from that lock you were strictly forbidden to open, the key to some forbidden room you thought you'd forgotten about.
Yeah.
That quiet, unwavering presence is precisely why the guilt feels so heavy. Loud crime can be defended against, argued with.
Right.
But this silent internal accusation, it just stands there. You can't fight it.
It is the silence that confirms the guilt. The feeling implies this massive, completed action. I have absolutely no recollection of performing in the waking world. The conscious mind just draws a blank. But the body knows the sequence of events.
And this is where we touch on the core function of repression, really. The conscious thinking mind. It's often an unreliable witness, isn't it?
Totally.
It can lie, it can forget inconvenient truths, it can rationalize away deep shame. But the body, this repository of felt experience, that's the true archive. This particular memory, this sense of a crime, it resides not in the rational frontal lobe, but in the somatic memory. It's held in the texture of your skin, settled into the fine lines of your knuckles, maybe seeped under the nail beds.
Wow. It's like the face lies so easily. We can smile, nod, say, I'm fine, maintain this flawless facade of competence.
Of course.
But the hands, suddenly they become these strangers that hold the absolute, undeniable truth, like a secret communion with some forgotten dark vow.
And what's crucial here is the sensory detail that often accompanies this image.
Yeah.
Because that helps us decode the repression mechanism.
Yeah.
You mentioned the air around the hand. Sometimes it smells faintly of iron.
Yeah, like metal.
It's the scent of small childhood injuries, perhaps. Or that metallic taste when you bit your tongue to stop yourself from crying out in public shame.
Oh, okay. I see that.
It's the memory, maybe, of watching a parent or a primary caregiver flinch, and that instantaneous silent decision made by the small self to just freeze, to do nothing externally.
But the internal violence? Oh, the interior drama that followed that flinch. That's where the real damage was incubated, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Inside, where no external rule could reach or punish, the fantasies of self-defense or maybe control, they bloomed like these deep, hidden bruises. Tender, forbidden, and completely cloaked by the sleeve of the rational adult.
Right.
That hidden violence, that feeling of having committed a psychological deed, is what the stain represents.
Yeah.
If we were to use, psychological language. This is like the transferential effect of denied emotion.
Yes.
It's the raw material of a wish twisted so far from its original context, so rigorously denied expression, that it has donned the heaviest, darkest costume available. The costume of horror.
So you're saying the guilt we feel when seeing the stain is really just the protective armor, covering a wish that was too pertinent, maybe too unacceptable to admit.
Exactly. The blood is not actual blood in that sense. It is the symbol of the pressure applied when a powerful desire, maybe a wish for exclusivity or a wish for unconditional return, was denied access to language.
It couldn't be spoken.
It couldn't be spoken. So it becomes the residue of a profound, consuming desire that was shamed into silence. The mind says, I cannot want this much. And the unconscious delivers the symbol, a self-accusing stain. This is the mechanism, you see. The energy of the desire is too high to simply vanish, so it transforms into a moral objection, which we feel as guilt.
So the horror protects me from the knowledge of my own forbidden wanting. Wow. But,
No.
okay, if I accept that, I still have to wrestle with the implication that I somehow committed a crime in my mind. Where does that stand in, reality?
Well, the insight here is that the unconscious, being essentially amoral and symbolic, it doesn't really distinguish between a thought and an act.
Yeah.
It doesn't file charges based on external reality, does it?
Yeah.
It delivers its invoice based on internal intensity.
Uh-huh.
And this leads us directly to the concept we really have to accept to move forward. Feeling is doing in the symbolic realm.
Feeling is doing.
Yes. The stain is the proof that you felt the desire for exclusion, perhaps, or for possession, with the intensity of an actual physical rupture. Hashtag tag 2. The ancestral echo and the inward rupture.
Okay, so the trembling that sometimes accompanies this image, it's not fear of discovery, like being caught. It feels more like immediate gut-level recognition, a deeply rooted familiarity. It feels like something that was happening before I even had words to articulate rules, you know? Back when love felt purely transactional, maybe measured in dramatic displays or stolen glances.
That recognition, it confirms you are accessing the memory bank of the inherited pre-verbal self. And we really must expand on this idea of inheritance, because the blood in your hands is almost never yours alone. It is often the generational residue of unspoken emotional contracts.
What exactly do you mean by inherited gestures that contribute to this feeling of stain? That sounds complex.
Let's use the symbolic image of the parental hands you carry, perhaps. You mentioned earlier, maybe the father's hands, always washing, always scrubbing away the dirt of the workday, washing before every meal, a continuous ritual.
Okay, yeah.
This isn't just hygiene. It can become a visible penance, a silent communication that maybe existence or productivity or even desire always leaves some residue that must be purged. You inherit the need to wash, even if there's nothing visibly dirty.
And the mother's hands, maybe always busy, always fixing something external to me, fixing my collar, fixing my mistakes, fixing the environment around me.
Exactly, a constant state of, perhaps, nervous activity. The desperate attempt to repair everything around her, precisely because maybe she couldn't fix the core self.
Right.
The stain becomes the accumulation of these scripts, these patterns. You inherit the underlying belief system that to be worthy of love, you must either continuously cleanse yourself of invisible fault, like the father figure, or continuously manage and fix the world around you, like the mother figure. When you inevitably fail to live up to these impossible, often unspoken contracts, the shame surfaces as a physical symbol of failure, the stain.
Okay, but this sounds a bit like we're shifting the blame back a generation or just finding excuses. How do we draw the line between that inherited script and, adult responsibility for the intensity of my own possessive longings now?
That's a crucial distinction, and it often gets lost in psychological interpretation, I think. The blood might be the legacy, the inherited language, but the choice of how to respond now is yours. The generational residue gives you the vocabulary of guilt. It teaches you, perhaps, that wanting too much is punishable.
Okay.
But the adult responsibility begins when you realize the desperate, often self-destructive question ingrained in that heritage. If I hurt myself, if I ruin this beautiful thing, will you finally stay to fix the wreckage and therefore stay with me?
Wow. So the violence isn't outward aggression. It's in the sheer desperation of the need to be chosen, to force a moment of exclusive, urgent attention.
Absolutely. And this violence often manifests as what we could call the inward rupture. The core distinction here is vital. The blood didn't come from an actual outward action. It came from longing. Desire for unconditional love, for exclusive warmth was so powerful, yet felt so shameful,
Right.
that you held it too long, too tight internally, until something gave way.
So the sharp fantasy maybe of cutting a tie or removing a rival or creating separation just to force closeness, that did happen. But the dreamer, I cut myself first with the shame of the wish, like an internal leak that finally surfaces in the dream state.
That's precisely the mechanism of self-punishment we often see in the unconscious. Every time you rehearse a scenario of abandonment, perhaps, every time you imagine the catastrophe that would force the coveted person to turn exclusively to you, you internalize that act. The wish itself felt so unacceptable, so powerful, that it became a kind of psychic hemorrhage. The dream, the stain, is the surfacing of that internal damage.
And the unconscious, acting as the sort of ruthless accountant you mentioned, simply delivers the invoice. Is that it?
Yes, essentially. The ledger's quite simple in this realm. Desire equals deed. Longing equals legacy. The stain is the final, undeniable proof. It is the body refusing to distinguish between the thought and the action, using the most dramatic alphabet it possesses, blood, when the sophisticated, rational mind refuses to speak the core truth. I want you, exclusively. This intensity, held and repressed, manifests as a mark of crime, ensuring you feel the severity of the wish while simultaneously protecting you from having to acknowledge the wish itself. #tag 3, the primal scene of division, the child's hunger.
Okay, so if the stain is an invoice for a deed done only in thought, we have to trace that intensity back to its origin. Where did this desperate, possessive need to be the only one actually start? It feels too big for just an adult emotion.
It started almost certainly not with malice, but with a primal form of hunger. Not the kind that the stomach registers, but the kind that lives perpetually in the eyes, the gaze of the small child processing the world. The hunger of being small and realizing quite suddenly, and perhaps devastatingly, that the source of warmth and comfort, the parental gaze, attention, was finite, wasn't always available.
Small enough that attention felt conditional, like a door that only opened halfway maybe, and the currency needed to open it was complex and confusing.
Attention became a scarce currency.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when you realize you cannot reliably earn it through conventional means, like being quiet or good or polite, you learn to steal it through drama. Not necessarily through loud external tantrums, which are often easily dismissed or punished, but through silence, through strategic withdrawal, through the quiet, dramatic act of holding your breath perhaps, or becoming ill, or refusing to eat.
Oh, wow.
Until someone noticed the effort, rushed over, and suspended all other activity to focus exclusively on you, even if just for a moment.
And for that suspended second, you were the axis mundi, the center, the only one, the reason the adult world stopped functioning, essentially.
The goal was primal. To be the reason the hands paused. To be the chosen focus. And this right here is the root of the crime the stain represents. The child didn't wish actual harm on a rival, a sibling, a friend, even a parent's work demanding attention. They wished for interruption.
Interruption.
Not destructing.
Exactly. A small, manageable crisis. A cut, maybe a fever, a fall. Just enough to make the parental gaze forget the distractions and return exclusively, urgently to them.
So the ultimate aim wasn't destruction at all, it was realignment. To ensure the attention flow was directed entirely and, ideally, irreversibly toward the self.
Precisely. The interior drama of the mind. It has no limits, does it? It practices scenarios of exclusion and removal. And when the external world failed to provide that necessary exclusivity, the inner self took on the burden of creating the drama required to ensure attention.
So the grown-up translation, this fantasy, that's the source of the stain. As an adult, I don't wish for fevers for someone, I wish for endings? Is that it? Not of lives, obviously, but endings of connections that threaten my central importance. That's the adult mechanism of the repressed child's hunger. You wish, quietly, secretly, usually quite shamefully, for the person you love now to lose something or someone else that demands their time, their focus, or their emotional resources. Not because you are inherently cruel, but because you are desperate for fusion. You want to be the absolute harbor, the indispensable healer, the only one left standing who didn't cause the pain, but who provides the necessary relief from it.
I understand the desire to be needed, that makes sense, but the feeling of wishing catastrophe on their external world, that's what makes the shame of the blood feel so justified, so earned.
But look closer at the intention underneath that feeling. You don't actually want them to suffer eternally. What you truly want is for them to need you desperately, exclusively, and maybe irrevocably.
Right.
The sheer intensity of this need is what feels like a crime, because it violates the societal rule, the adult understanding that love must be free and independent.
And the unconscious, this ruthless symbolic translator we keep talking about, it dresses that essential primal need in the most dramatic costume available. the blood of emergency.
Why blood? Because blood means crisis. Crisis means interruption. Crisis means, look at me, only me. The blood is the symbolic residue of the mental act of cutting the threads that tied your beloved to anything outside your connection. The stain is the signature of exclusivity.
So the horror of the stain is actually proportionate to the repressed intensity of the need. The bigger the fear of separation, the deeper the color of the blood.
Precisely. And this mechanism explains why the stain feels so heavy with guilt. It's not just guilt over a wish for interruption. It's guilt over the immense power of your own possessiveness, a power that felt dangerous even to the child who first experienced it, long before they could name it. Hashtag 5E, fusion lust, and the eroticism of erasure. Now we really have to follow this thread of intense possessive need down into the basement of the psyche perhaps. Because this dream and the guilt that follows it is fundamentally rooted in frustrated desire. And that desire often carries a hidden sexual energy. But this is not the tidy, polite desire for conventional intimacy we usually talk about.
No, we're talking about the kind of desire that utterly confuses love with possession, right? And closeness with a total, absolute fusion, like merging.
You could call this fusion lust.
Yeah.
Is the psychological drive originating way back in the earliest attachment phase. The craving to eliminate all boundaries, to share a single identity almost with the loved one. The primal scene, in this sense, wasn't necessarily the sexual act between parents, which can cause its own confusions, but perhaps the crushing, terrifying realization for the small self that the source of love, the parent figure, must be divided and shared, that they have an existence separate from the child's needs.
That realization that I was a separate entity and couldn't just absorb the parent or be absorbed, that must be where the refusal of division began. The small self just refused this reality, craving a return to that initial, seemingly indivisible warmth.
The longing is not for a temporary embrace, is it? It is to be held so tightly, so completely, that you cease to exist as a separate, vulnerable entity. You want to dissolve into the loved one.
Wow.
To erase the boundary between the us and the them. To become essential, like the voice that answers before they even form the question, or the air they breathe without thinking.
That deep craving for merging, it's terrifying because it feels so invasive, doesn't it? So demanding of the other person's freedom and separateness. It's like the ultimate form of dependency disguised as love.
The refusal of division fueled the desire for the erasure of separation. Not through actual murder, of course, but through the psychic removal of distance.
Yeah.
And this brings us right back to the genius, in a dark way, of repression. The mind protects you from the full, raw, socially forbidden power of this unacceptable fusion lust by wrapping it entirely in a metaphor of horror.
So the mind performs this kind of transformation. It takes the pulsing, raw wish of, say, I want you so completely to myself that I need to eliminate everything else you care about, and disguises it in the guilty fear. I woke up with blood on my hands. I must be a terrible person.
It's an encryption process, absolutely. The unaccepted wish is too destabilizing, perhaps too indicative of an infantile need that feels shameful to the adult self. So the mind uses guilt as a shield. It takes the thought, I wish they were utterly dependent on me, and transforms it into the physical sensation of, I dreamed I committed a terrible crime.
Okay.
This transformation allows you to feel the truth of the intensity, the stain, without having to consciously know or claim the unacceptable possessive wish itself.
So I feel the shame and the guilt of the crime, which conveniently prevents me from realizing the depth of the original longing that caused it in the first place. The guilt serves as a kind of distraction from the desperate need underneath.
It succeeds in transformation, but fails in deletion. You are not haunted by genuine malice. You are haunted by an intense longing that was shamed into silence, probably very early on. That longing learned to speak in symbols, in knives maybe, in empty rooms, and in hands that won't come clean. The stain is proof that you desired something massive.
But if fusion lust is rooted in this really primal, demanding desire, how do we distinguish it from, say, toxic or abusive relationship patterns in the waking world? The fantasy itself feels like an echo of control.
That is the essential critical question, isn't it? In the symbolic world of the dream, the blood is the sign of the pressure, maybe a cry for help from the wounded child part of the self. In the waking world, if that fusion lust is acted upon, if you actively sabotage a partner's connections, for example, or use emotional manipulation to enforce dependence, then it absolutely crosses the boundary into control and potentially abuse.
Right.
This deep dive isn't about excusing the fantasy, it's about understanding its origin, so you can consciously manage the adult manifestation. The dream says, I felt like I wanted to take something away to ensure love. The awareness says, okay, My need for exclusivity is so immense I must manage it consciously, rather than letting the repressed child dictate my behavior.
So the blood isn't evidence of who I fundamentally am, but maybe more like a map. A map of where my deepest vulnerability lies.
Exactly. It anchors you to the wild, wordless, wanting soul beneath the managed adult exterior. The unconscious doesn't care much about politeness. It cares about truth. And your truth, buried under layers of should and must, is the desperate, essential plea. I wanted to be chosen. I wanted to be irreplaceable. The blood ensures you remember that desperate, necessary wanting.
Okay, so if we accept this idea that the dream isn't a warning about an outward crime, but a profound internal confession, then the moment of waking up shifts entirely, doesn't it?
It does.
The immediate terror, that jolt of guilt, it might be replaced by a kind of quiet recognition. Maybe the small, soft-eyed child inside whispers something like, "This is what love looked like when no one taught me the language of safe attachment."
That is the pivotal moment of insight.
Yes.
And with that insight comes the only path to genuine relief, I believe. The blood does not need to be violently scrubbed off. It needs to be understood. Cleaning the hands doesn't cleanse the soul, does it? Only naming the desire hiding beneath the guilt allows the stain to fade.
Yeah.
And it fades not through some chemical cleansing, but through internal acceptance. A shift in perspective.
So I realize the blood isn't saying you are a monster who acts on violent impulse. It's saying something much more gentle, actually, and paradoxically much more demanding of my self-awareness.
It says something like, you wanted to be loved exclusively, eternally, unconditionally. And that deep longing is not a crime. That is a fundamental human prayer that perhaps went unmet. That desperate wanting, hidden under layers of shame, is not evidence of fundamental evil, but of intense, vulnerable life. It is the sign of a soul fighting against the pain of separation, using the tools it had at the time.
So the final necessary shift isn't about denial or cleansing at all. It's about witnessing the mark, maybe, and choosing to accept it as part of my history. Like walking to the sink and holding the hands underwater, not to remove the stain, but almost to bless it.
Yes. Exactly. Hold them under the water, not fighting the reality of the mark, but letting the water slide over the red. The blood shouldn't swirl away down the drain as if it never existed. Maybe it should darken, soften, and sink into the skin like memory accepted, like a hard-won truth absorbed. You must let it stay, for a moment, as a symbol of your depth. That is the surrender. Not surrender to guilt, but surrender to honest presence with what is.
The stain transforms entirely in that moment. It no longer accuses, it simply accompanies me. It roots me to my truth and to the depth of my capacity for feeling. It's no longer evidence of a crime, but maybe a love letter written in the only ink the unconscious had left, that iron scent of primal need.
It becomes your signature, your scar perhaps, your story, and most importantly, it becomes your compass. It reminds you that the initial impulse was not to murder or destroy. It was to hold on, desperately, beautifully, so very humanly, to love. It anchors you to that fiercely wanting child part of you who never got quite what they needed.
This means the dream of the blood isn't really over, but the reaction to it has changed entirely. I don't feel like a criminal anymore. I feel like a witness, maybe, and a translator of my own history.
You become the poet of your own depths. And the awareness changes everything. The awareness transforms the energy that once might have driven you toward emotional self-sabotage or possessiveness into an energy you can now consciously manage and direct. The immense force of that repressed need, once understood, can actually be used for connection, not exclusion.
The knowledge that I felt that I desired that intensely, that I was maybe willing to sacrifice peace for belonging, that's the powerful message I have to carry forward.
You no longer wake up trembling from the horror. You wake up listening for the message. That blood, that sign of internal rupture, now becomes like a signal fire, pointing toward the exact source of your earliest unmet need for exclusive intimacy. You know where to look now. #tag outro. Hey, you know, the symbolic dream is never truly finished. It simply changes shape based on our acceptance or lack thereof of its previous message. That moment of waking, when the stain might still feel visible, it's not an escape, but a transformation where the deep truth revealed by the blood becomes a part of your working heritage.
Right, it's the realization that the stain doesn't have to weigh me down. It can actually root me to the intensity of my own life force.
Tonight, the dream may return, or perhaps a new symbol will take its place. It might wear different shades of red, who knows? But next time, you won't immediately ask, "Oh God, what did I do wrong?" You might whisper, gently, even to the stained hands, "What are you trying to teach me about what I still need?" You will meet the dark, demanding parts of yourself, not with fear or denial, hopefully, but with curiosity, and maybe even gratitude for the brutal honesty of the unconscious.
The blood remains, but it's softly glowing now, like a permanent signal rather than an accusation.
So we invite you, our listener, to consider this final provocative thought. If your most terrifying, shameful fantasies are merely encrypted, perhaps exaggerated prayers for intimacy, for exclusivity, and for deep guaranteed connection, what specific, beautiful, necessary truth have you still refused to name out loud in the daylight?
Wow.
What longing is curled up inside you right now, waiting to speak its name, waiting perhaps to bleed through in some way? The dream is not your enemy, it is your oldest, most honest friend. And its language, however shocking it might seem at first, is the language of the soul when the world has forgotten how to listen. The blood is you, and you are becoming, still, always.